Well, to unpack that very complicated question, we've invited Evelina Ohab to join us. She's a lawyer, a human rights advocate, and a co-founder of the Coalition for Genocide Response. Evelina, it's been a while since we've spoken with you. Good to have you back on the show.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Great to be back.
Evelina, over the past couple of months, this word genocide has been thrown out so much, more than I probably heard in the last 5 years. So let's begin with some ground rules. What is the official legal definition of genocide as described in the convention, and what are the parameters for how someone would be found to have committed something genocidal?
The definition of genocide is in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. It's a very precise legal definition, and it says that genocide means any of the acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And some of the prohibited acts that Article 2 includes are killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So this is the definition of genocide. And in order to prosecute an individual for the involvement in genocide, of course, it is crucial to obtain evidence of the involvement in the crime. And over the years, we've seen some steps in this direction, especially, for example, in Germany. German courts convicted 3 Daesh fighters for their involvement in genocide against the Yazidis. But unfortunately, such prosecutions for genocide are rare.
Okay, we'll get back to that in just a moment, but just last week we had a guest on from the Norwegian Refugee Council, and she had joined us to talk specifically about what she's witnessing in Sudan, and that situation is being described as a modern-day genocidal war, along with being a civil war. So I wonder, what are some other examples of genocide that are taking place right now?
Yes, there are several ongoing genocides. We can start with, of course, the Yazidi genocide that started back in 2014 and was perpetrated by Daesh fighters. But unfortunately, of course, this genocide is ongoing, and over 2,700 Yazidi women and children are still missing. We can talk about the Rohingya genocide that started around 2016, 2017. And again, over 1 million of Rohingyas are still in Bangladesh in camps over there. We can talk about the Uyghur genocide that started around 2018. And of course, that included over 1 million of Uyghurs being incarcerated in camps in Xinjiang region and subjected to horrific atrocities. But there are also several other instances of the serious risk of genocide, or situations where we see the elements of genocide, but they have not been recognized as such. And that includes, for example, the situation of the Hazara in Afghanistan, the situation of the Tigrayans in Tigray region of Ethiopia. And of course, as you already mentioned, the situation in Darfur. 20 years after the last genocide in the region, we already see the early warning signs, risk factors, and the serious risk of genocide against Darfurians. And of course, we can talk also about the situation in Ukraine, and especially the abduction of children, transfer the children to Russia and subjecting them to illegal adoptions there. So these are only few examples from recent years. But of course, for example, we now hear calls to consider the situation in Palestine against the legal definition of genocide. So we see an increase of situations that require analysis and assessment against the legal definition of genocide, and of course then identifying what needs to be done to address the situation and to support the communities affected.
Now, let's return to a point you brought up earlier, which is the prosecution of genocide. How exactly does that happen? And you mentioned that it's difficult. Why is it difficult?
It is difficult because, of course, one requires a lot of evidence in order to bring proceedings against an individual. But unfortunately, of course, around the world, we see that not enough is being done in this direction. And I'll give you one example, and that this is of the Daesh atrocities. For example, in the UK, over 400 Daesh fighters returned back to the UK, and there have been some investigations, there have been some convictions, but the convictions were only for terror-related offences, and there were only 32 convictions over the years. And there have been no cases for genocide, and there seems to be zero political will to engage with the question of genocide and explore the option of prosecuting those who return back to the UK for the involvement in genocide. Some other countries have been a little bit more proactive. For example, Germany has been leading on prosecuting perpetrators for the involvement in genocide, using the principle of universal jurisdiction. And then a few other countries have followed this lead as well, including the Netherlands. There have been some investigations, prosecutions also in the US and also in Canada. But unfortunately, this is not the rule. The rule is that the perpetrators are getting away with genocide, and prosecutions are actually only an exception. And then, of course, we can look at the state of the international justice for the Daesh atrocities. And we know that there are limitations, for example, in the way the International Criminal Court can get involved. It has, of course, very limited territorial jurisdiction, and many cases of genocidal atrocities are outside of the scope of the mandate. So unfortunately, of course, that prevents the International Criminal Court from getting involved. But unfortunately, generally speaking, there are not many prosecutions for genocide, and this is something we need to address. We need to change, and especially because we have the duty to punish the crime of genocide. That does not only include introducing laws that will enable prosecutions, but actually proceeding with investigations and prosecutions of the perpetrators.
Evelina, before I let you go, in all your many years of research, you must have seen how powerful that word is, how it fires people's emotions, how defensive people get, how offended some get. What is it about the power of the word genocide that evokes such powerful emotions?
When we think about genocide, of course, one of the main pictures that we have in our minds is of the Holocaust and the horrific atrocities that were perpetrated by the Nazis against Jewish people in Europe. So this is why the word of genocide has such a strong meaning but ultimately, of course, we always need to go back to the legal definition of genocide and not only think about the Holocaust, but really analyze the situation against the legal definition of genocide in Article 2. But also, there is a reason why many people want to talk about genocide, because, of course, there are duties that flow from the Genocide Convention. Genocide Convention does not only define genocide, it imposes obligations and imposes the duty to prevent genocide and to punish the crime. And we already discussed the issue of the punishment in terms of criminalizing genocide and ensuring prosecutions, but ultimately the duty to prevent genocide is something that requires also a little bit more attention. And as the International Court of Justice explained, the duty to prevent genocide arises when the state learns or should normally have learned of the serious risk of genocide. And this is the trigger for the duty to prevent. Not when we talk about bodies lying on the street, but when we talk about the serious risk of genocide. And unfortunately, over the years, over the many decades, this is the duty that states around the world have been failing again and again.
Evelina Ohab, always good to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Natasha.